Welcome to episode 2 of the Joint Readiness Training Center, bringing the crucible to your couch, intelligence best practices. I'm Colonel John Ives. You can reach me via my email address, which will be located somewhere along the bottom of your screen. You can also follow us on Twitter at India6JRTC. Again, we'll be going over the 8 bullet points of the intelligence best practices, which I'll be posting for you right now. Again, these are the best practices for the intelligence warfighting function and how an S2 can truly make a command team successful at JRTC. Yes, you can win. Okay. That first bullet on that sheet of the 8 is led by an S2 with a clear understanding of the 4 core competencies and the intelligence process. Last episode, we talked about the 4 core competencies. This episode, we'd like to cover the intelligence process. But I'd like to take a step back and talk about understanding. Now, when I say that, I'm not talking about rote memorization. That does nobody any good whatsoever if you can recite all of ADP 2-0. What I mean is for you to know that there is core competencies, to know that there is an intelligence process. That's the first piece of understanding, is to know it, to be able to recognize that it exists. That means you do have to go to Chapter 3 of ADP 2-0, which is only 7 pages long, so please take advantage of this opportunity to download that and read it. The next piece is you should be able to take what you know, what you've read, and be able to explain it, be able to talk it out, be able to, if you were to try to sell it to somebody else, be able to do that. And then the third part is to be able to apply it. And that's really what I want to talk about here, because when you come to JRTC, it's not too late for you to read the ADP on your way to JRTC, but it would be a great opportunity for you to practice it before you come, and then actually put it into action while you're here. So let's go ahead and move on to that first one. Okay, so the intelligence process. First off, let's take a look at it. Yeah, there it is. The first piece of that one is to plan and direct. Now, a lot of people think plan and direct, the first thing you're doing is driving right into that collection plan. And you should see some of the things that come out of a collection plan that's done by a collection manager who's located someplace different from the S2 or the all-source team that's doing all the IPB products. What you end up with is a collection plan that doesn't match where you think the enemy is going to be. And it definitely doesn't match what the friendly plan is, because they created a collection plan before there was ever even a concept of operations. So don't think plan and direct means go right after the ICSM. If you look on this chart, which I'll show you again, this is my Vanna White impersonation, by the way, what you get is IPB. First part of this whole thing is IPB. But really what it is what do I know and what do I need to know? And then you go in and do your information collection, which is, hey, somebody go find me this. I don't understand what they mean by tank battalion. I don't know what they mean by exploitation force. Somebody try and pull all this together for me so we can start looking at it. And then you go through the steps of IPB, which is another video, so don't worry, we're not going to dig into that one too much. But IPB then leads into a collection plan. And that's where you start talking about actually directing assets, some sort of a plan, that plan and direct. So when you start talking about directing assets, who directs assets? Is it the S2 or is it the S3? A lot of S2s try to direct assets using the Annex B. And I hate to burst your bubble. Has anybody actually read an entire Annex B, especially in the middle of a rotation, in the middle of a constrained timeline when you haven't slept in probably 2 or 3 days and it's raining and you're upset and you definitely don't like your OCs? Yeah, nobody's reading the Annex B, especially the people that are receiving the assets that are supposed to be collecting in their area. So don't do that. What ends up happening is your SIGINT team shows up and then they don't get fuel. Your HUMINT team shows up and they don't get any security. So what you have to do is make sure that the S3 is the one that's directing, meaning here's the operations order, here it is in the task to subordinate units, and then off they go to do what it is they need to do, because then the battalions receive those assets accurately. And then the same thing down at the battalion level. If you have a capability that has been brought to the battalion and you want it to go down to Alpha Company or out with the scouts, make sure that it's tasked properly. That's part of plan and direct, and something that an intel person, an S2, really has to think about before they do something ridiculous like try to hide all those requirements inside the Annex B, which nobody's reading. I'm sorry to tell you this, nobody reads it. So that brings us to the next piece. which is the plan and direct of more than just the collection plan. Because we've talked about, hey, you want a plan? I want FMV here. And we start talking about the collection plan, and you get all excited about it because it's the exciting part of Intel. But let's talk about the plan and direct of the Intel architecture, which also happens during this phase. Now, at some point or another, you're going to want to be able to talk to all of your Intel people. So this is where you plan your pace. What is the primary, the alternate, et cetera, of your pace plan of how you're going to communicate from BCT to battalion, or battalions down to the companies, from that scout. Remember yesterday or last time, whenever it was you watched this last, in episode 1, I talked about that 19 Delta that's living in the rain in a sumac bush. And where's the plan and direct for how you're going to bring that information back and how it fits into everything? But then it's also, if you're at the BCT level, what's the plan for that data at rest and data in motion? Like we talked about last time, is do you have a knowledge management plan of where you're going to post all these IPB products? Because I guarantee you, you're going to struggle with getting the bandwidth of getting all that information out to your teams, down to the battalions. And then, of course, battalions, not a whole lot of bandwidth of taking those cool products you're putting together and getting them to the company. So what's your plan of how you're going to share what it is you have with people and then get some sort of feedback back? So this is the part where a good BCT S2 or Battalion 2 says, okay, I'm putting together this great, IPB, I've got a great sit temp or whatever, and you send it out, and then you get nothing back because part of your plan didn't include, I want feedback within 3 hours, or I want feedback before you complete your portion of the sit temp. So you come back to me and say, hey, I'm not buying it, boss. Let's talk about this a little bit more. And that's something you need. Part of your plan and direct means also when you plan for the shadow to go out and do collection, you've got it going, deep, or you've got a Gray Eagle doing part of it and shadow doing another part, and then you've got scouts doing another part of the NAIs in depth, if you will. But then your shadow platoon leader goes and sits with the BAE or the BAO and comes back and says, I can't hit any of those NAIs. When was the time in all of that planning and directing where that shadow platoon leader comes back and says, I can't go that deep. Somebody's going to shoot me out of the sky. And here's a hint. Somebody's going to shoot you out of the sky. So think your way through this one of how you want people to provide feedback as well, because that's part of the plan and direct phase also. Okay, now let's move to the collect and process portion of this one. Now, this is where you talk about the execution of collection, but then also the initial processing of information. And in some ways, it's really like the single source processing of information. So when you look at the collect and process phase, this would be the shadow going out and doing that FMV collect, and then you've got somebody watching the OSRVT or whatever you're using to look at the video. And then your analyst is taking that initial look and providing some sort of information. That's the collect and process phase. This is an important portion of it, and people get very excited and they want to skip right to it. But if you don't do that plan and direct, because I'm going to harp on that one, if you don't do the plan and direct, you can't really do the collect and process piece. But this is a good time to throw up this chart once again. Okay, so take a look at this for a second. And notice that there's these other circles inside there that talk about the analyze and assess piece. Now, this is the part where people say, I've collected, I've processed, so therefore I'm analyzing and I'm assessing. And they really talk about the analyzing and the assessing of the information. Yes, absolutely important. But like I said, some people say that's the bread and butter of intelligence, is doing that analysis. But if you're doing everything the right way, the analysis is just snapping and popping. It's happening. So take a look at this piece as not just analyzing that, yes, I've seen a tank in the NAI, and so I assess it to be this, and now I'm analyzing the situation and I'm saying this. That's just analyzing and assessing the information. But let's analyze and assess the value of that collection asset at this point. If you've seen that there's something in that NAI and it's confirmed or denied, do you need to continue to follow that tank for the next 8 hours of your Gray Eagle time? Probably not. But you'd be amazed how many units show up here and think about in that they've collected, they've processed, meaning they've analyzed and they've assessed as a part of this big circle. Here it is again. As part of this big circle, analyze and assess, and they don't ever really take a look at the assets themselves to say, is it time to move the SIGINT team? Should my human team be on the front lines of my defense at this point, or should I go ahead and move them someplace else? Where's the assess and the analyze of that, especially coming right out of that collect and process phase? So take a look at that one and think about it for a minute. Okay, this brings us to the produce phase. So if you take a look again at our cycle, in the produce, we're talking about the production of all source materials. We're talking about taking all of that individual SIGINT, HUMINT, the all source, or I'm sorry, the FMV, and bringing it in, and the all source team really sitting down, putting the brain together to create a product, something they can kick out. But it can be a lot faster than that also. Keep in mind that if you already have, and I'm sorry, I know I said I wasn't going to touch IPB, but let's go back a moment and talk about in the IPB process. If you have a good event matrix, then you understand when things are going to happen and what they mean. Meaning if you do find a tank in this NAI, it means that the exploitation force is going here. So if you take a look at that, the production phase kind of becomes the current ops captain suddenly jumping up and yelling, "Attention in the talk, I got course of action too," or whatever it might be. So don't get wrapped around the whole concept of this is the part where the all-source analyst creates a PowerPoint briefing and kicks out a 10 megabyte product over a system that only pushes at 1.8 megabits per second. So take that into mind, that production is not always just producing a product. It can just be somebody saying, we've collected, we've processed it, meaning I've thought about it. I've done the analysis and the assessing as a part of this whole circular process, and now I'm producing something that is of value, because sometimes that of value is literally somebody just yelling, I got tanks. But this is what they mean, is that next part, and that's the production piece. Now that brings us into dissemination. So if you look at the chart yet again, we have dissemination. Dissemination, I know I harped on this one last time talking about the core competency of PED, and the D of PED is dissemination, processing, exploitation, and dissemination. So in that dissemination piece of your core competency, and then here you have it inside your intelligence process as well, and I guarantee you when you start talking about your collection process, you're going to have PED again with dissemination. So dissemination, let's go back and talk about where I said the current ops captain suddenly jumps up and says, I got tanks in NAI 101, which means course of action 2. Well, he just disseminated the information into the talk. So you don't have to overthink dissemination. But I also caution you against underthinking dissemination. All too often, the underthinking of dissemination happens because of the plan and direct piece of this big circle, okay? The plan and direct piece of it all. They're not thinking about how's the data going to get from the BCT to the battalion, or how is the battalion S2 really going to get that information to the scouts who need to know something at that last moment, or how is those scouts going to get that information back in here? So thinking about dissemination is multi-layered, it's multi-int, and it's four-dimensional, because it's not just how things are moving left, right, up, and down, but it's also how are things happening across time, because your dissemination piece changes. So when I talk about a four-dimensional multi-int PED or multi-int plan, that's what I'm talking about when I say four-dimensional, is that piece of time that what you talk about in phase 1 of the operation, you have to change how you talk about it via which methods and to whom it needs to go to differently in a different phase. And so that's the fourth dimension when I talk about that one. Okay, so now we've talked about all the different parts of the intelligence process. Now let's look at this chart one more time, because I like to do my Vanna White thing. Hey, look at the neat trick I learned on iMovie. If you look at this one, you've got the intelligence process on the outer circle, and then inside of that one, you've got that analyze and assess, which is part of the intelligence process. But then you also have internal to that one those 4 core competencies. So you don't have to put up with one of my Venn diagrams. You have a diagram that the Army already put together for you, and it's in that Chapter 3 of ADP 2-0, and I highly recommend you go and take a look at that one yet again. Okay, so thank you so much again for joining us for episode 2 of the Intelligence Best Practices at JRTC. Again, this is a way to get a hold of me, my email address somewhere along the bottom of the screen, and then the closing credits will have a little bit more ways to get a hold of us. Please send me all of your comments, anything you want me to talk about after I go through these 8 bullets, then we'll talk about those. So thank you very much. Be safe, be smart, and go wash your hands.